Hello.
Hello.
This is Dr. Holden, the Dean of Science. Dr. Holden, why don't you tell us about where you went to school and what you graduated with and what you became?
So I did my undergraduate work at the University of New Hampshire. I got my Bachelor of Science degree there. I did do a semester as an exchange student at San Diego State and got to work at Scripps Institute and Public Health of San Diego. Found out that I really had more interest with the public health piece than I had realized. My original degree was as a food chemist, which I have never once worked as, so that's kind of a strange element to that. And then continued on at the University of California, did graduate work, ended up working at Tokyo University. That was quite an interesting couple of years. Taught at Southern University and did one course that I taught at Charleston College of Charleston. That was it. And currently I am here as Dean of Science.
Well, that's all. You can tell she has a lot of background in science, a very knowledgeable person.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Holden, you were around in the 1950s and you were a young child
Correct.
back then.
Yeah.
So we are now talking about the inventions of DDT and penicillin.
Okay.
And we would ask you to tell us about your experience with DDT when you were a child and anything you remember.
Oh, I remember a lot about DDT. I had a very distinctive smell to it. We used to have canisters. My father would buy them by the caseload. They were this color blue, fairly small, maybe about the size of like this bottle, and they had a valve on them. And my parents at the time had a second kind of like a hobby or a career. They would grow hybrid plants very specific plants for flower shops. So back in the late 50s, early 60s, a bride-to-be would be planning her wedding out 1 year in advance, and if you think flowers are important now, they were even more important then. It was one of the first things they had to choose because the growers had to plan out getting the bulbs from Holland, France, were the two main places my parents got the bulbs for, and then they had to be planted specifically and really fussed over to bloom at exact the right time. So at times the bulbs had to be iced, at times the bulbs were heated for several weeks. So it was quite an elaborate job. And my personal job, being the youngest of the family, they did not want me weeding in the fields because I would pull up anything, and I did pull up everything. My select job was to release the DDT in the evening. So the gladiolas and some of the most expensive flowers that they would be doing, mosquitoes would lay their larvae in the nighttime as water condensed inside of that. The larva would hatch and then would make swirly patterns all throughout the flower petals. And that was a no-no. So my job was to go out into the 30-odd acres of fields and release multiple of these canisters. And because I loved the shower effect you would get from them, I would be playing in that every single evening, and my siblings would comment about how much I stunk. They couldn't stand the smell, and the smell didn't bother me at all. We did not have a problem with mosquitoes.
How long were you doing that type of activity of releasing the DDT?
I can remember it, so probably 4 or 5 years old, and then I think when I was maybe 9 or 10, they finally gave up that project because it took a lot of time and it wasn't a high profit. So probably a good 5 years that was my job. I know, and you figure probably started it probably April, May, and then would go through till September. So that was quite a bit of DDT that I was inhaling.
Of the known effects of the long-term problems that it caused to humans and animals, do you feel any of these, or do you have any of these?
I have skin cancer. I've been treated for multiple pieces, but having said that, the odds are that was the very normal getting too much UV light as a child. We did not have any kind of skin cream covers. In fact, I can remember when Coppertone first came out, everyone laughed about it. Why would you put that on? We want a tan. I can remember my sisters liberally applying baby oil like a turkey baster and laying out in the sun. So none of my siblings have developed a cancer that you would consider to be related to that. My parents also, my mother lived till she was 96, didn't seem to have any effects. Strangely enough, we had a neighbor that had apple trees that always sprayed it with the DDT, but didn't use the valve canister. He had this pump, and he would go around pumping the apple trees, and he would come out covered with white powder. And my father would say, he's being ridiculous, he's going to get sick from that. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm doing that only in the spray form. But he said the spray was nowhere near as bad for you. But that neighbor, Mr. Higgins, did die of cancer. So I've often wondered since then if that was like a doom to come. It generally stores in fat, so as a very svelte little child who did not like to eat, the odds are I was actually lucky because I didn't like to eat, that I did not store a lot of that DDT. It doesn't, at the best it breaks down to DDE, so that is just as bad as DDT, so there you go.
So when you were younger, you have told us that you have had polio.
Yes.
Can you tell us your experience with polio and
Sure.
penicillin at that time and the Salk vaccine?
So when I was born, 56, they already had Sabine and the Salk vaccine. There was always that debate as to which one should they use, live virus or not the live virus. And people they never think about it. You watch those zombie movies on TV and you think, oh, we're going to get a vaccine and next week the vaccine's going to be available to us. Well, that's not how vaccines go, especially during that early period of creating mass amounts of vaccine in a short period of time. We simply did not have the technology or the capability of doing that. So I know in Salem, New Hampshire, our area, we operated off of a lottery system. And it was by your father's the last name. So our name was Cooper, and I know that we did not get our lottery vaccine. I was in between first and second grade this summer when I got the vaccine. And I can remember there being fusses. I can remember when I was, before I went to school, Salem was closed for a period of time, Salem school system, because 2 children had developed polio. So of course the vaccine has already been made, and we're still having issues with it. If you look at the old newsreels, it looks like 1956, we no longer have polio. Well, if you look through historically, there were still quite a few outbreaks all the way through to 62 and 63. The problem with that early vaccine and the World Health Organization making the decision that they were going to go with the live vaccine, not the dead vaccine, is that there wasn't a great deal of thought in the process. So what you did was you stood in a long line on your lottery day, and I can remember vividly standing in that line because I was very fussed about how long it took. And there was a little white paper Dixie cup, something like what you would pump to, ketchup or mustard in it at one of the restaurants. And in it was a sugar cube, and they squirted a pink liquid on that sugar cube, and you tossed that down. And it tasted horrible. I don't care about the sugar cube, but I was about to spit that out. My father was yelling at me that I got to chew it up and put it down. Every single person going through the line got the exact same dose of live virus. So my father being a good-sized man, some of my, brothers being, 6 foot, they were quite a bit older than I'm getting the exact same dose they are. And by that evening, my sister Maureen, who is 4 years older than I, and I both came down with extremely high fevers. It had been one of the warnings that they gave parents. They had a little poster that said, children may develop fevers, do not be alarmed, etc. But by the next morning, we both had limited use of our legs, and my mother knew immediately it was from the vaccine, brought us to the hospital where the Kinney method was used on us as far as for muscles. It's called Sister Kinney. It had been a nurse that had developed wrapping the muscles in very warm, wet towels and kept changing them out. And the thought process was if the parents kept moving the limbs and the muscle tissue, etc., they may not have as much damage to it. Well, it doesn't make all that much sense to it, but it actually seemed to work for an awful lot of people. We never lost our ability to breathe. Our heart always kept functioning. I do have significant damage to the spinal muscles. I have scoliosis of the spine that was not treated by surgery or was not going to be fixed by surgery. They tried casts and they tried braces, but they said because it was due to the polio, it is not only the muscles weren't able to hold the spine upright, but it also allows rotation of the spine. So fusion therapy can align the spine but can't stop that rotation of the spine. My sister Maureen and I both developed prolapsed mitral valve of the heart, which was very common for that time period. My parents were actually quite happy that that was all that happened to us. I can remember my mother complaining years later about the vaccine wasn't that bad. Yes, you've got problems, but the alternative was you could have been in an iron lung and died. Neighbors' children had died in previous years. So I think there was a balance back then of understanding the risks outweighed what might happen. Where today, if something like that occurred, every parent would have been suing that their child had developed that virus. So very different thought process. Technology has come a lot further. Again, it's very difficult, I think, for your age group to understand. You may have to wait years in a lottery system before you might be able to get a vaccine that is quite necessary.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Dr. Holden, for answering all our questions.
You're so welcome.
And